We turn now to our message, and we're continuing the series Following Jesus. And this morning we're looking at Touch from a Distance. And I think it's a story that means all the more in the times we face right now. So we are in Luke chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. When Jesus had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. There a centurion servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders to the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to him to say, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am under authority, and soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such a great faith even in all of Israel." And the men who had sent returned to the house and found the servant was well. May the Lord bless his word to our hearts and minds this morning. Well, again, I welcome everyone who has turned in virtually to worship with us this morning. I realize this might be new to you, as well as I know all of our lives have been changed as we've been put in our homes, and sometimes cabin fever is even coming on, and all kinds of cleaning kinds of concerns, which are really legitimate. And of course, we even have hand sanitizer up here this morning. But when I walk through the door now, my daughter meets me with hand sanitizer and says, "Dad, did you sanitize your hands yet?" And so she squirts some on, and we do that ritual. But I also know that as we're spending more time at home together, that some of us are getting prolonged cabin fever. And for some of you, this might mean some interesting things. So for some of you, spending so much time at home, you might find that day after day that your home is getting messier and messier and messier. So if you're out there, that might be you. Or for some of you folks out there, you might find that your home has never, ever been as clean as it is right now. And for other families, they might have one of each of those people in their home, and so hopefully that strikes a harmony and not an area of conflict, and so you can look at each other right now and think about that. There's so many ways that our world is changing. And for so many, I suppose, particularly from our traditional service, that worshiping from afar, worshiping virtually from a distance, has changed all of our lives. And so I think this story this morning speaks to us in perhaps new ways. I know it does to me than I've ever looked at it before. And so we look this morning at Jesus touched from a distance. And I invite you to walk back into the story this morning. So Jesus is on his way into Capernaum. News of some of the miracles that he's worked has reached people, as well as the news of his teaching. And it's found its way to this Roman Centurion, who is a Roman officer in the military, over 100 other soldiers. He has a servant who is sick at his home, may even be quarantined. And so that brings a message to today. We know that he had a fever. And this is recorded by Dr. Luke, who often looked at medical things a little differently than some of the other writers. And so we're told that this Roman centurion sends some friends who were leaders in the Jewish synagogue to Jesus to ask Jesus to heal the servant. Jesus is on the way to this Roman centurion's home, or the home of the servant who is sick in his home. And he is met by some of his leaders who give the word from this Roman centurion, who says, "It's not necessary to come to my home. If you just speak the word, it will happen. In fact, I have people who are under my authority, and I say come, and they come, and I say go, and they go." And Jesus turns to those who are around him and says, "I've not found such an amazing faith in all of Israel." And Jesus speaks the word, and we're told that that servant is healed from a distance. It's a beautiful story, isn't it? And so when we think about this story this morning, we think about Jesus healing from a distance. In fact, it's rather amazing because when we think about Jesus healing, we think about Jesus healing next to a person, touching a person. 75% of Jesus' miracles were happened in person. But it's also true that 25% of the miracles that Jesus performed were performed from a distance. And so I want to reflect on that this morning. Because for many of us, as we're in our homes, we feel distant, maybe from church, and also perhaps even distant from God, from our Lord, who we long to worship this morning. But when we look at this story this morning, we realize that Jesus can touch us from a distance. And is exactly what happened with this centurion this morning. And as you look at this, it's interesting because it's not just that Jesus healed the person from distance. It's also that people joined together from different religions, different faiths, different races, and backgrounds and beliefs to perform this miracle and to bring the story to Jesus. You have this Roman Centurion who's an officer in the Roman army. And the Roman army, in some sense, was oppressing the Israelites. And yet he was friends with the Jewish leaders because we're told that he loves our people and he even helped build our synagogue. And so they joined together, people of different races and places, different languages, perhaps even as their native language, and came to Jesus. And Jesus saw through all that and honored that. And Jesus spoke the word, and the servant was healed from afar. So if today you're wondering, as you feel maybe disconnected from the Lord, maybe you felt like there's some distance grown from you and the Lord for whatever reason, realize that Jesus can reach across the distance, and Jesus can touch you just as he did this servant. And so that's the first spiritual blessing that I learned from this story this morning. The second thing I learned is that we need to pause and give thanks for those who have touched us from a distance. As we look at this story, we realize that everybody was working together to help this servant. We have the Roman Centurion, we have the Jewish leaders. Everybody was working together to make a difference so that this man might know God's healing presence in their lives. And this past week, I don't know who you can think of maybe who has reached out to touch you. My own life, I've had people sending emails, I've had phone calls, I've had texts as we have practiced this social distancing. And you treasure those moments all the more when you face the challenge of being apart, sometimes by 6 feet and sometimes by miles. But we learn to appreciate those phone calls, those texts, those notes of encouragement. I've seen some stories too that I was blessed by as I saw this newspaper story that I followed, that folks, obviously most nursing homes are quarantined, and so folks can't go into the home to visit them. And one particular news story, they lined up all the folks who were in the nursing home by the windows, and then everybody who wanted to visit them sort of came by the sidewalk, and they all kind of waved or held up signs. And in that beautiful moment, even though they were separated from the distance, they were touched over the distance. And I know that the folks in nursing home gave thanks for those folks taking that time to visit them, and no doubt the folks who visited appreciated that all the staff had worked together so that all those folks could be next to the windows so they could wave and send sort of greetings and moments of love to them in so many different ways. Last Sunday, when we did online worship as well as some worship here in the sanctuary, we had people who watched from over 40 different states. We had a number of people who watched, and we sort of felt reconnected in that moment. And I got these notes, and other people got notes, and we had this interesting interaction we hadn't had, and so people were appreciating all that people were doing for them. I know also that we have people out there serving our folks today, and our medical folks are trying to keep some distance from folks, and yet they're on the front lines as they serve folks who are touched by this COVID-19, many of them struggling for their lives. And so they are reaching people and touching them from a distance. And then, along with thanking people who've touched us from a distance, I think we can all take a moment and think about who we might touch from a distance this morning. Knowing how our own lives have been touched, we think about perhaps there's someone that we can touch from a distance. And maybe it's an email, maybe it's a phone call, maybe it's a text, a FaceTime, whatever it is for you. You can send a note of encouragement, love in some way. For many of our community, they are reaching out and helping people. So whether it's dropping off breakfast, cereals for folks who are in need, or delivering lunches, or even folks that are doing the drive-through and getting it for somebody else. We see people coming together in a way that we haven't seen folks coming together in quite some time. And so, pause for a moment and reflect on how you might touch people from a distance. I also think it's true that for many people, you might even be in the same home, but many times over time we've grown apart. There's been some distance that has separated us. And so now might be a time where we can reconnect with each other. And even though we may not be far apart physically, emotionally, perhaps we become distant. And so now's a chance to reconnect with people, to let that distance go, and to rebuild relationships in a way that is powerful and pragmatic in so many different ways. One of the stories that I love in the Bible, in addition to this story of Jesus touching someone from a distance, is the story of the Israelites who at one point in time were conquered, and many of the best and brightest were taken in captivity and were taken to Babylon, the capital of the Babylonian kingdom. And there, many of these people who were often young, even teenagers or younger, even though the best and brightest, were stressed. They didn't quite know what to do, and they needed some kind of a direction in life. They needed a note of encouragement. Well, hundreds of miles away, a prophet by the name of Jeremiah decided what he would do was to write a letter of encouragement to them. And so he penned this letter of encouragement, and he told these young Israelites in captivity that they needed to be calm for a moment, and they needed to live and settle there, to go ahead and know that God had everything under control. And then he told them they needed to be a blessing in the community, a light in the community, a light in the darkness. And he told them to trust God, that God would see them through. And he told them to be strong in their values and to stand for what was right. Those Israelites, those young Hebrews, received that letter of encouragement, and we know the impact that it had on some of them. We know that Daniel received that letter of encouragement and talked about it in his book, and we know that he had the strength and courage to stand for what was right, even when he was threatened and thrown into the lion's den. We know that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the young teenage Hebrews, were threatened if they didn't bow down to a foreign god, and yet they found strength, no doubt, from that letter as one of the resources, and were willing to stand firm in that moment for their faith and what was right. And even thrown into the fire, they found encouragement enough in the faith and presence of God that helped them to overcome that trial. That letter, we don't know the whole substance of it, but we know a great deal of that letter. And one of those pieces of that letter is one of the most encouraging pieces that rings through the pages of Scripture, and I'd like to share it this morning. It's found in Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 11 and following. And this is what it says, and I hope you can hear it ringing out through the distance to you. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me. When you seek me with all of your heart, I will be found by you, declares the Lord. What a beautiful message of hope, and I hope that is a message to all of us today. It touched those young Israelites in a way that helped them to stand firm in their faith for what was right, and to be a beacon of light in the community they were in and in those around the world. As we think in our own life about how we might touch others, I'm reminded that the series that we were currently doing, that is postponed for right now, entitled Dining with Jesus, has been a blessing to many people. And as we've thought about Jesus dining with people, we sometimes think about Jesus as teaching to multitudes, and we think about his teaching then. And sometimes we think about Jesus' miracles, and then we think about Jesus' divinity. But when we think about Jesus around the table, we think about Jesus' humanity, Jesus' presence with us here now. And so wherever we are, separated by miles, many of us are taking time to reconnect with each other, and hopefully with the Lord as we gather around the table or gather around the TV, kind of do a movie night. But I hope one of the things that we're doing is to pray, think about God's presence with us there. Even as we think about those stories of Jesus dining with people and the blessing that that brings with us. I would like to remind all of us that as we do that as we bring our prayers to the Lord and we reconnect to God, that God hears our prayers, whether great or small. And a story that I'd love to share in closing is one that Philip Yancey shares in one of his books. And the story is this of this pastor who was taking prayer requests one morning. And someone raised their hand in the back, and it was this man. He stood up and shared about his daughter who was in the hospital, was very ill, and needed to be held up in prayer. And so the pastor acknowledged that prayer request. And then the pastor's 8-year-old daughter stood up and waved her hand. The pastor thought to himself, oh my goodness, what is she going to share right now? And so the pastor's daughter begins to share that her hermit crab is sick at home in the aquarium, and she has this hermit crab in, and the pastor just thought to himself, oh my goodness. And in the midst of this illness of this young person in the hospital, we've got a hermit crab. And so the pastor said the prayer, and then right after the service, the pastor went and found that man who had shared about his daughter in the hospital. And he said, I just want to apologize to you, sir, that you brought this request of your daughter in the hospital, and my daughter stood up and asked for prayer for the hermit crab. And I know this is just not a concern that we should bring when you have such a serious concern. And the man said, oh no, please, I'm so delighted to hear that. He said, you know, the God that cares about the big concerns of someone in the hospital, the God who cares about the small concerns of a hermit crab that's a pet of your daughter, is exactly the God that I want in the hospital room with my daughter. And I'm so glad that we can bring our prayer request to God, no matter how big and no matter how small, no matter what age we are, young or old, that God hears all our prayers. And I think that's a good reminder for us today as we reconnect with our family and reconnect with the Lord, that God hears our prayers, whether big or small. To listen to our kids as they bring prayers around the family table or devotions before bedtime, and to bring them all before the Lord. And so this morning, wherever you are, however distant you may feel from the Lord, perhaps there's been some things that have caused some emotional or spiritual distance from you and the Lord. I invite you to reflect on this story of Jesus healing this man from afar. And those also who worked together to bring healing to this man, and be thankful for those who have touched us from a distance. And then finally, to challenge ourselves to return that, to reach out to others across the distance, wherever it is, and to send a note of encouragement. Perhaps it's a scripture you could share, perhaps it's a phone call, text, FaceTime, whatever it is. And know that together, as we face this challenge, that we can all find a new connection across the distance as we bring before the Lord our requests, big and small. Would you join me in prayer? Lord, as we think about all those worshiping this morning, and all the needs that are around our world, we're so thankful that you still meet us from a distance, even as you did in this passage this morning. Lord, help us to reconnect with you, to again feel your touch, and to know with full confidence that you are well able, as we open our hearts and lives to you, to touch us from a distance. Help us to be thankful for those who had a meaningful touch in our lives this week, and even now are touching people's lives as they minister to those who are sick, those who are hurting, those who are heartbroken this morning. Lord, help us also to join in the efforts as we reconnect with you, with each other, and touch others from distance. We pray this all in Christ's name. Amen.